Minister, just on the supplementary welfare supports, look, I don't believe that in principle there is a reluctance in the department to facilitate it. I know that you personally are committed to ensuring that this is as flexible as possible, but the reality on the ground is different. And the first thing I would ask you to do as a matter of urgency is that you would have a remote meeting with every single community welfare officer in the country and relay to each and every one of them that they need to be as flexible as possible in relation to financial supports for families that are struggling at the moment. Now, the difficulty is that we, as members of the Oireachtas here, are finding individual cases where people are being denied supports, and there is no measure there to reflect that within the statistics that are provided by the department. Now, the fact is that if any community welfare officer deviates from the means-tested support, that has to be accounted for separately within the department. What we're asking is that that information would be directly collated and provided to the Oireachtas. And I think you need to relay that to each community welfare officer, that this is actually being measured. Because the reality is that, yes, there should be into every household adequate income in theory going in. That's the objective behind the social welfare system. And look, we can talk all day whether that is adequate or not, or in relation to the anomalies. But the reality, as Deputy O'Keefe has spoken about, there are addiction issues in households where there is allegedly sufficient income going into that. We have all come across cases of coercive control where there is sufficient income going into the house, but the mother and children are not the ones receiving that money. And we see it in relation to domestic abuse. Now, the government is clearly stating that it wants to take a different approach to gender-based violence. Then it has to start with flexibility in relation to this payment. And it is not just about a different approach being taken by community welfare officers. And I can give you, Minister, examples of in relation to the very worthwhile system that you've put in place regarding the rent allowance scheme for victims of domestic violence, where that has been denied by community welfare officers because they were not aware of the scheme. So if they're not aware of something very basic like that, my concern is that some of them will not be aware of the comments you're making about the flexible approach that should be taken in terms to exceptional needs payments. And finally, can I say that we do need the community welfare officers to go back out into local communities. Having a family who does not have access to money, having to travel on a round trip of between 50 and 80 miles to actually get to a community welfare officer is pointless, because they don't have the money to put the petrol in the car to get there in the first place. And if there is issues in relation to coercive control, they won't have access to the information to fill out the 6-page form. They may not have access to a phone to make that call in the first place. So I think a far more flexible approach needs to be taken by community welfare officers. And I think I would ask you, as Minister, to have a remote meeting with every community welfare officer in the country before the end of this month and clearly reflect to them the priority of government, your priority, and that of every member of the Oireachtas. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, deputies. Can I just be very clear here? All community welfare officers have been notified that more people may not be able to meet their costs, and decisions need to take all circumstances into account. This has been relayed. As you well know, Cathaoirleach, my job as Minister is to set policy. It's the job of the executive and the staff then to implement that policy. I've been very clear today that the community welfare officers and the supplementary welfare allowance and the essential needs payment is there to support people. That is our job. We are here to help people when they need it. Obviously, there'll always be specific cases where somebody isn't happy with the outcome. There is a system whereby it can be reviewed, and I will give you a commitment as colleagues in this committee room that if you have specific cases, bring them to my attention, and I will speak to you about specific cases that may appear. But I'm very clear here today that all community welfare officers have been notified, and decisions need to take account of all circumstances. And I have no doubt they are the vast majority, and I actually don't know of any, but anyway, there may be some out there that's applying something differently, but the vast majority of community welfare officers are doing a good job on the ground. And I know that they're in contact. The MABs pick up the phone, MABs can get in contact with them, and I don't think I've found a case yet where a community welfare officer didn't take on board the recommendation of MABs. And I've been dealing through the credit union with MABs and community welfare officers for a long time. And I have to say, any that I had contact with have been officials of the highest integrity, and they've been out there to help people. And that I want that to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We move on to a programme on working age employment supports. And just before I take members on that, can I say, Minister, that we have invited you in next week to the joint committee meeting to deal with the issue of local employment services. So, look, if you could, and if your office could come back to us on that invitation. Now,